Welcome to the LTEN Connect Virtual Learning Forum. My name is Josh Felix, and I'm joined by Chris Weaver. We're from MLevel. We're looking forward to our learning lab. Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So hello, everyone. My name's Chris Weaver, client partner over here with the MLevel team. I really specialize in understanding our customers' use cases and how they can take their learning and apply it within our digital learning platform.
Chris, thanks. Yeah, and Chris and I make a team here at MLevel, and I serve as MLevel's senior strategist, working with our large core clients in regards to the utilization of our platform to ensure that their strategy meets what their end result goal is in regards to utilizing our platform. We're looking forward to taking you through this learning lab, and join us. Well, welcome. The other 20%, why it matters in learning and the 3 pillars of learning, learning with a purpose. This is our learning lab. Chris, I'm excited that you joined me. Obviously, as you had mentioned earlier, you serve as a client partner here at MLevel, and we team up to really take care of our core clients, especially within the pharmaceutical space, and look forward to this journey that we're going to take, for the next 19 or so minutes. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I know we're starting in regards to this other 20%. Maybe we don't want to allude to what it's all about yet, but when we think about it, in business, knowledge is truly everything. When you have an extensive knowledge of your client space, so let's just think in the pharmaceutical space, if you know what the physician needs, if you know what that office visit is going to be all about, does that give you an edge? Does that give you power in regards to the choices that are going to be made? Chris, talk to me in regards to the pharmaceutical clients that you work with, when it comes to really business and the knowledge of what they need out in the field.
Yeah, so when I'm working with our customer base, specifically within the pharma space, they're always saying, Chris, how can we constantly upskill our employees, right? How can we ensure that our individuals know more than the competition? When they walk into a healthcare professional's office, right, whether that's a hospital, whether that's a doctor's office, what have you, they want to make sure that those individuals are prepared to not only represent the product of the company, but the company in general, right? So that's understanding who they're talking to with when they walk into those individual locations, as well as the products that they're going to be talking to that particular customer about.
Yeah, and I think that's where that really the knowledge is everything comes in, and that's why it's so important, especially when you think about learning. Gaining knowledge within learning is really the key. This is a favorite of mine. I know this is on my wall in our office, and always remember, Senta potenta esta. Sir Francis Bacon says it best, and I know nobody that's listening to this might necessarily know what that translates to, so we'll make it easy. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is the true power, and Sir Francis Bacon, he said this, and this is just something that we always think about in learning, and having that knowledge, the power behind the knowledge, and truly everything that you do, but even more so within the business space. Is the power knowledge? Is power, Chris? I mean, when we're working with our clients, what's the power that they need? What's that true superpower?
I mean, from my perspective and working with customers across the board, it really comes down to retention, right? And being able to quickly recall that information that they have previously gone through, right? So when they are having a conversation with the customer, to be able to quickly recall knowledge, product information that they've previously learned about and fit that into their conversation so it flows naturally, right? That's going to be the difference between potentially upselling or selling to a new customer or potentially having that business go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and when we start digging in, let's address the problem, and let's, kind of get to what the punchline is about this learning lab. The problem, it's concerning ourselves with only 80% mastery of a topic. We're creating a 20% knowledge gap right off the bat. Like, we haven't done anything, right? You haven't even challenged the learner, right? But we do this every single day. We do this with the learning programs that are in our LMSs. We do this within regards to, ILT, or more so, let's fit today's model, VILT. Why do we only concern ourselves with 80% of a topic? What about that other 20%? Is that a challenge? Is there a problem? Talk about that problem, Chris. the issues that we're experiencing, when we don't focus on that other 20%.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's almost like I wish I could kind of go back to the beginning, right, and kind of understand when that arbitrary number was kind of put into place, right? Because it seems to be whichever customer I'm talking to, 80%, 85% always seems to be kind of that magic number where they say, hey, if an individual understands that amount of the content, then they can kind of move forward. And the problem that we're creating here is we're basically saying, hey, it's okay to not know that other 20%, but what is the impact that that knowledge gap is creating, right? So if they don't understand what maybe some of the side effects are for a particular drug, right? Or
we talk about that problem, and I think you bring up a great thing, when you think about, what could take place in the office, what knowledge might you not have, is that gap a concern? You're sitting there, you're in the office, and all of a sudden you're missing that 20% of what the physician's asking for. That's an issue. That's a challenge that we're faced with. And, this gap's been created by all of us, and was it a gap that was just arbitrary? Was it a gap that we just said, okay, this is okay? But what does it affect? It has a direct impact truly on the organization, and maybe even more importantly, on the bottom line. So let's get into that impact. So, talk me through, what is that impact, Chris, truly of that other 20%?
So I really think you kind of outlined it there, very well, Josh, right? Is the impact is ultimately the bottom line, right? And a lot of it is going to depend on the content, right, that a particular learner is going through, right? Whether that is compliance related content, whether that is sales training related content, and so forth. But either way that you tend to cut it there, it all leads back to the bottom line. So let's use that compliance piece as an example. So let's go ahead and say that we're taking somebody through some sexual harassment type training, right? And let's say that they only score an 80%. They have demonstrated that they don't understand some of that other 20%. And ultimately, maybe there is an event or an incident, right, due to someone's lack of knowledge regarding those compliance procedures, right? Is that going to impact the bottom line of the organization? Of course. Likewise, let's go ahead and say that somebody doesn't understand 20% of the information regarding a particular product, right? Is that going to potentially impact the way in which maybe an organization moves forward with that product, right? Reducing the potential sale of that product? Of course, right? So without full knowledge of that particular subject matter, we're leaving the door open for money to be leaking out of the organization ultimately.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think when we dig even a little bit deeper, as we mentioned here on the slide, often it manifests into employee churn, less efficient teams, and customer retention. It all is a drive to that bottom line. So, that other 20%, it just produces a culture that we say, adequate's okay. Hey, if you can get by, you can get by. And, I kind of think about, my kids and saying, is a B or C okay? Or do I want them to strive for the A, right? And this is really what that's all about, filling that other 20% and really moving forward. So the solution, businesses can easily solve for the 20% knowledge gap with the right data and the right attention to data. And I just mentioned the same word twice, Chris, I think in the same sentence, data, take me into it.
Yeah, so for us, right, the biggest piece is the data, right? Data. And one of the things that I like to preach to our customers is, how can you learn from your learning data, right? Your learning data shouldn't just be focused on, hey, who has gone ahead and completed it and how they performed. But more importantly, okay, have they completed it? Where are the knowledge gaps? And ultimately, how can we go about resolving those knowledge gaps, right? So understanding those knowledge intersects, right? So that other 20% where those individuals are struggling, and then starting to think about, okay, how can we start to educate and reinforce that other 20% so that we bump them up to 100%, 100% understanding of the subject matter, so that we can ultimately either maintain or increase that bottom line that we were just speaking about.
So in the end, data is the key, right? Data is the solution. And how do we get there? And I think that's the interesting part. How do we accomplish this? Truly, the development of a strategic approach for creating and evaluating organizational learning. Plain and simple, every org should really put this on the wall. And when they're going through it, this has to be it. It has to be strategic, both in the creation process as well as the evaluation process. And I know when we're working with clients, Chris, often we will start at the end and we work our way back and we say, what do you want to know out of all this training? What's the goal? What's the message that you want at the end? What's the data that you want at the end? What are the results? What are the insights? And then working our way backwards. And I think that's what really takes us into the second part of this learning lab. And it's the 3 pillars of learning. You and I have spent years really focused on developing this learning theory that our platform utilizes in its ability to deliver learning. It's the 3 pillars. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and give us a high level in regards to what those 3 pillars are. And then I know we're going to dig into each pillar on an individual basis.
Sure. So when we think about the 3 pillars of learning at MLevel, it's really all about these couple of things, right? And we've spent some time going through various learning methodologies and so forth, and really kind of boiled them down to these 3 pillars. So the first piece, right, is going to be that knowledge transfer, right? How do we go about taking the subject matter that we want our end users to understand and comprehend and get that into their minds, right? We define that currently as that active sharing of experiences, foresight, intelligence. Ultimately, how can we get them that subject matter? From there, we have knowledge reinforcement, right? So we just transferred knowledge to these individuals. Now, how are we going to reinforce that and commit that to their long-term memory, right? So how can we go ahead and start to bridge that gap between those employee performance deficits as well as their training needs? And then last but not least, right, it's all about the assessment. So now that we've given them knowledge, now that we have reinforced it with them and helped them to commit that to their long-term memory, long-term recall, and so forth, right? Now let's go ahead and assess that to ensure that they continue to retain that knowledge and really have a strong understanding of that knowledge. Again, right, this is a very programmatic and strategic approach to creating any type of learning program, right? Oftentimes we see a lot of customers, they come to us with a very kind of tactical type of learning program. Hey, we need to go ahead and educate XYZ group of employees on this particular product, right? Or this particular standard operating procedure or process, right? And the question that we start to ask is, why, right? What do we want to get out of this training, right? What are the business impacts that we want to have? And really, once we understand what are the business impacts that we're looking to get out of here, and really that why, we can then look to put together our learning objectives. And then from there, once we have our learning objectives, we can then go ahead and determine what's the best way of getting knowledge to them. What's the best way of reinforcing that knowledge with the end user, with the learner? And then last but not least, how can we go about assessing that knowledge?
You mentioned something really interesting. So you're saying that majority of the clients that we work with don't follow this approach, right? Like, we're only thinking on one track. We're not thinking of really the pillars that you need to make a successful program.
Correct. And here is kind of my thoughts on the matter. And I think a lot of times customers, they set off down the route of saying, yes, we need to go ahead and we need to structure our program in such a manner. But then life happens, right? Things kind of start to get off the rails a little bit, and they start getting away from the true goals that they've set out for a learning program. And then what they happen to do is just kind of settle, right? They settle for saying, hey, they just have to go ahead and complete 80% of it. And they start to forget, hey, why did we set out on this journey and what did we really look to impact? So those 3 pillars, right? Planning around each one of those pillars is really going to help them keep everything on the rails, but ultimately put together a holistic learning program for that end user that's going to be able to measure obtainable business results.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, it's great. I mean, I know we follow it each and every day, and I think that's what we push to the client. So I think it's helpful how you approach it. You know, let's talk about the power of MLevel. You know, no self-promotion here, you know, that we want to focus on, but really these are things that you should look at in any platform, right? Is it engaging? Can you create with ease? Can you analyze? And, you know, the important pieces of that are, you know, having an integrated microlearning gamification platform, you know, being able to create. It's a no-code content authoring tool. Imagine, no code, no special training required. And finally, the ability to analyze real-time business intelligence and performance analytics. It allows you to really know what the end user does and doesn't know, as well as how well your learning is performing. And I think these are three very powerful pieces of our platform. But Chris, let's move forward. Let's go into the pillars. The knowledge transfer pillar. You know, there's 4 things that we pose as questions here, and let's walk through each one of them. You know, knowledge transfer. What are the learning objectives? Terminal enabling. If you don't know those learning objectives, how are you ever going to transfer knowledge? So this is that part, once again, just jumping back 30+ seconds ago, where you really have to know what your training is all about when you're coming in to do the design work.
Correct. And it's not just about, you know, us being learning professionals, right? And going ahead and we're going to jot down and then record somewhere what the learning objectives are for that module. We need to also educate the end user on what those learning objectives are, right? I know that we all kind of think about the whole WIFA model, right? Or the what's in it for me. Let's educate that end user on what they're going to be able to get out of this training, right? What they're going to be able to learn, and then also how that's going to improve, you know, their day-to-day operations and their day-to-day performance in their role.
Gotcha. So I'm going to challenge each one of you that are watching this learning lab, answer these 4 questions truly. What are the learning objectives, both terminal and enabling? What behaviors are we trying to derive from our learners? Who are our learners? And where will our learners be engaging? That 3rd question, Chris, I always find is one of the most important. I think often in the learning profession, we design for ourselves and we don't actually design for our learners. And we need to stop and we need to ask these questions in regards to who are our learners. And just as a reference, if you're interested in our platform, on the side, these are some of the activities that we do support that really supports this pillar of learning. But let's go ahead and we'll jump to the next pillar, Chris, the knowledge reinforcement pillar. I know this is one that you are proud of. I know you spent a lot of time with some of our former clients in regards to understanding what the reinforcement that needs to take place. I'm going to go ahead and let you dive into these 4 questions.
Perfect. Yep. So knowledge reinforcement is certainly something that's kind of near and dear in my heart. And as Josh had mentioned, I spend a lot of time with our customers just creating and having conversations around reinforcement plans that they can be launching out with each one of their learning programs. And one of the big things that I really like to kind of start off with when it comes to knowledge reinforcement is the way in which we go about reinforcement. So through the conversations that I'm having with customers, right, a lot of times what I'm seeing is their form of reinforcement is simply just taking some type of assessment and giving them that assessment again, right? The same exact questions, we're just gonna go ahead and say, hey, go ahead and take that maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks after you've gone through the course, and that's how we're gonna reinforce that content. And ultimately, it's a very poor idea, right? Because if we're just giving them the same content over and over again, all we're doing is reinforcing the way in which the user has to answer a question, right? So we're successfully educating that end user on this is the answer to said question. Instead of going down that route, what I like to challenge our customers with, right, is rethinking the way in which they can take content that they previously showed to a end user and reframe it, right? So let's go ahead and say maybe we made a bunch of true or false questions. Let's go ahead and take the same purpose and the same meaning of those true or false questions, and let's rephrase those into multiple choice questions, right? Or let's say we have multiple choice questions that fit very well with a kind of a scenario, right? So let's go ahead and maybe let's form those into a scenario type activity, and have them demonstrate that they can apply the knowledge that they learned in the training in a scenario, right? Further reinforcing the way in which they're learning that content. The other piece too is don't always feel like reinforcement has to be done through some type of quick quiz or a knowledge check, right? Utilize the different modalities that you have at your disposal, right? So for example, a short video makes a great tool for reinforcement, right? It can be sent out, it can be watched within 5 minutes. Oftentimes there isn't much additional work that needs to be done on the learning professional's end, and it's still reinforcing the concepts from said training. So again, right, while we have some kind of key pieces to think about here, the biggest one that I would take away is, one, how do we go ahead taking the experience that the end user previously went through and reshaping that for them? But then also, what are some different modalities that we can expose them to further help with the reinforcement?
Yeah, I think one of the important things that you mentioned, it kind of ties into that subtopic that we have there, the subtitle, an information-based, and I'll say it again, the information-based. It doesn't just have to be questions. Like you said, this can be a video. This is something that's reinforcing that knowledge. So there's a variety of ways that you can truly do that reinforcement. And with that, we're going to head to that third and final pillar, one of my favorites, because I think this really helps tie it all together. Knowledge assessment, a measurement of how well information was received and anchored within an individual. And these are three questions that are near and dear to my heart, Chris, and I know that I harp on them every day, I think, with both internally as well as with our clients. What bottom line metrics are we looking to impact? What learning thresholds should we set to reach those bottom line metrics? And how can we use this data to take action? Yes, action. Like, you have to take an action. And I think too often right now, we're launching learning programs and we walk away from them. There is no action taken at the end. Granted, some you can't because you have no data, you have no insights. But I know within our platform, goodness, we have a partnership with Microsoft, and we utilize their Power BI tool to show you data all the way down to the question level for an individual user. So we get that in depth with the user, and the action has to take place. Chris, what are some of the things that you see, especially in our pharma space, with our clients about taking action with the data?
Mm-hmm. I would say the biggest thing that I see with our customers and that I continually preach to our customers is coaching, right? A lot of these organizations out there today, they're going to have, internal coaches, sales coaches, right? That this data is huge for, right? Here is the first time ever that they really have a strong understanding of, hey, exactly where are the users struggling, right? Where is Joe Smith, struggling as it relates to this particular process? Or where is Susie Q struggling as it relates to this particular product, right? That is very powerful information that a sales coach can walk into a room with, walk into, that weekly touch base with and say, hey, was able to take a look at some of the results from your last training. Let's go ahead and let's review this, right? This is how you can go ahead and start to bridge that gap. I think a lot of times what people start to look at and see is, oh no, we have all this data. Does this mean that we have to go ahead and create additional learning modules for people? No, not at all, right? What this means is that we know exactly where people are struggling. We know exactly what they're doing well on. So let's go ahead and let's use that and get that information out to the appropriate parties, right? Whether that's marketing, right? Whether that's sales operations, whether that's sales effectiveness and so forth, and give them that data. That is a huge value add that learning can be providing throughout the organization to other groups.
And what do we do with the data, Chris?
I'm sorry, what was that?
We take an action. I said, what do we do with the data? I said, we take an action.
Of course.
And I think that brings us to the next slide, and I know our time's limited here, so we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up. But this is what it's all about. It's a 360-degree learning experience. The three pillars drive you to that experience. So when you successfully implement the three pillars of learning, you're creating a 360-degree learning experience by providing both to the learner and the business with the following four things: using data we'll talk about our MLevel data to truly determine the mastery gaps, to bring the learning experience back to knowledge transfer. We have gaps. We understand what the gaps are. Let's start transferring the knowledge to help with those gaps. That's that other 20%. You're going to create an improved employee experience, truly. I mean, if an employee understands and is happy in their role and has the information, they're a happy an employee. It's a clearer path for evaluation, as well as the program in its entirety. I know in the learning space, we normally never wanted to know how well our programs are doing. We designed the program, we pushed it out, we moved on to the next one. Well, we have data now. And finally, Chris, I'll let you highlight the last one.
Yeah, and it's all about just creating that, you know, continuous learning event that reinforces the desired behaviors, right? Again, learning is a cycle. It is not necessarily a linear path, right? So we should be continually striving to improve our employees, right? And we're going to do that via tightly knit programs that are purpose-built and purpose-driven. And we're also going to do that via the data, right? Utilizing the data, understanding where the users are struggling, and ultimately routing them to the appropriate channels, whether that is additional learning modules or additional coaching, mentorship, what have you.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you know, it's been fun. It's been a short 20 minutes. Too bad we couldn't have been in person, you know, with everyone, you know, but we're looking forward to LTEN 2021, certainly, and meeting everyone face to face and, you know, continuing to really discuss both the other 20% as well as the 3 pillars of learning. So thank you for attending our Learning Lab session. We're obviously looking forward to an ongoing conversation. You see my email on the screen. Feel free to shoot me an email or feel free to visit our virtual booth and set up time via our Calendly link within our virtual booth, and we look forward to connecting with you. Okay, well, thank you for attending our session. Obviously, feedback, you'll receive that follow-up survey. We'd love to get your feedback and interested in hearing how we can make this an even better learning lab and event next time. Be safe and take care. Thank you.